every year, every semester has roughly its own kind of theme. And this semester, what I've done is I've extended invitations to speak with us to not other faculty around the school, but people in sort of high administrative and operational positions who do things at the university that we would like to engage in, or at least I think that we would like to engage in, and whose work reflects issues in science, technology, innovation, the future, that I think we could have really important, productive dialogues with. Because a lot of our students are folks who either come from a university setting or who aspire to work in a university setting. We can offer the kinds of things that our faculty do intellectually, creatively, academically, with faculty colleagues and even to outside consultants to engage with these people who work at the operations level at the university. One example of that people may or may not be familiar with was last year, Andrew Maynard and I supervised the postdoc who was working on studying the Alexas, the echoes that were put into the Tucker dormitory for the freshman engineers. And if we had known very early on that was happening, we would have had a much better study design, but we learned some really fun things in that regard. So we've got this new model today, and the first example of our new model is Timothy Summers. I've got this fantastic, crazy bio of him. He calls himself a hacker. Is that still the case? Is it once a hacker, always a hacker?
Always. Always.
Hacking in an ongoing fashion. He has a PhD, and he studied hacking culture in that degree. His current title, if I can get it right, it's very long.
It's way too long.
Executive Director of Cloud and Advanced Network Engineering Services at ASU, a global thought leader in cybersecurity, designing sustainable networks, disruptive innovation, and the hacker mindset. But what I want to focus on is that he was recently featured by CNN for revealing how Facebook likes can be used for personality profiling. And I think I actually just, over the past weekend, engaged in one of those profiling activities myself as a consumer.
Nice.
Because it was going to tell me which sort of superhero kind of figure I was on the outside and which I was on the inside.
Right.
This may or may not surprise you all. It turns out that I'm Wonder Woman on the outside and the Joker on the inside.
Whoa.
I'll leave you with that. And while I've got the platform, I'd just like to plug our second Enlightening lunch of the semester will be February 12th. Luke Tate will be here. He's, yes, on our faculty, but also he will be running the new Office of Applied Innovation out of the President's Office. So 12 February for Luke. And another plug for a new monthly series that we're going to be having during this year of 2020 that is going to be called 2020, A Year of Foresight and Anticipation. The first event there will be a discussion with John Schroeder from the Abundant World Institute, who is the new editor of a collection of essays on the 50th anniversary of the publication of Alvin Toffler's Future Shock. The book is appropriately called Aftershock, and John will be here on the 29th of January. Look for that. And without further ado, Timothy, thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. So first, let's just double check and make sure that the mic is on. Can everyone hear me okay? I mean, I can speak loud enough. I think I can reach everyone, but can everyone hear me all right? Yeah, is this a good tone? Perfect. First, I want to say thank you so much for having me. This is really exciting. I haven't been at ASU very long. In fact, less than a year. I think the beginning of February will be 1 year. Hey. And so this is really my first talk at ASU, actually, which is really exciting. When Dave and I met, Dave and Eliza and I and our teams met, my first thought was, wow, I've got to learn more about this school. There's some really interesting stuff going on. And I think we ended up geeking out in that meeting for quite a bit. And one of the outcomes of that was, would you come and speak for the school? I said, yeah, sure, why not? Let's do it. But then I was thinking, well, in the world am I going to talk with these guys about? So I'll tell you a little bit about myself because I like to get that out of the way. I don't do very well talking about myself, so it's important to go ahead and get it out of the way so you know who in the heck I am and why the heck I'm here. So my name's Timothy Summers. Thank you so much for that introduction, Dave. And I am, the position that I have here is really interesting. The title is way too long. What it essentially means is the network infrastructure, the identity and access management, our data centers, I can name a ton of other things. The Wi-Fi, all of those things are in my portfolio. So somebody complains about the Wi-Fi, somebody on my team gets a call. New server needs to be put in, probably someone on my team is doing it. We're laying new fiber optics, probably someone on my team is doing it. Part of the design, part of the architecture, all the way soup to nuts from beginning to end. So it makes us a very interesting unit at ASU. We kind of sit really at a core place where we get to see a lot of the bloodline, if you will, of the university, which I think is a really fascinating spot to be in at a place like ASU. So I said I just came here. I moved here, my fiance and I got engaged this weekend. It was kind of a big thing for me. So we moved here from Washington, D.C., and prior to being here, I was at the University of Maryland, College Park, where I was Director of Innovation and Entrepreneurship, and actually Jamie Winterden and I had worked together there. So coming to ASU was a really exciting opportunity, something new, something fresh, interesting. And I think what made this really exciting was during my interview, one of the questions was, so how do we keep you from getting bored? And I thought, man, all the stuff ASU's trying to do, I think I'll be all right. I think I'll be all right. So, so it's been a fascinating journey. Dave mentioned hacking. Yes, I'm a hacker. I started coding when I was 10. I've been hacking since I was 12. In fact, the first company I ever hacked. So here's how the story goes. So when I was young, I started coding really.
Saudi Arabia.
Not close, not quite. But when I first started coding, one of the things that really got me into coding and hacking was someone sent me a virus. And it was one of the most fascinating things I'd ever seen in my life. I mean, it was like mind-blowing because it was so elegant, the way it was done, and it taunted me the whole time. And that was what even excited me more. So when I got the virus, so I'd been arguing with this guy online. He's a hacker who called himself Cowboy. And so Cowboy and I were arguing online. And he sends me this virus, and I get the virus, and it opens up a window with a movie. And I don't know if any of you have ever seen those movies where it's like someone coughs and you can see little particles floating around in space and stuff like that. So this movie was showing me little particles floating around computer chips. I was like, that's fascinating. And then it opened another screen, and it just deleted every file on my computer. I mean, literally, while I'm watching the movie, every file is deleting. And I'm like, wait. So, it was this really fascinating experience. And then at the end, after all my files were deleted, this was known as a del tree virus because it used to be that you could delete the tree, and the tree was everything in the C drive, right? So essentially, oh, thank you so much. Coffee, I doesn't matter what time of day it is, I kind of need my coffee. I didn't get to bed until like 4 o'clock this morning, and then I was up again, like, it's crazy. So, thank you.
It's hot.
So it was really, really fascinating. At the very end, it comes up saying, you've been owned by Cowboy. And I said, man, I got to learn how to do that. So I wrote my first virus. And then I said, well, I don't really know how I feel about sending viruses. I really kind of suck that guy deleted all my files. Maybe I should write something that will stop the virus. Maybe I should write a virus scanner. That was one of my first apps, was a virus scanner. So how did I make the virus scanner? Enter Timothy hacking. Well, I decided, I want to make something really good. I don't want to make anything that's like crappy. So I decided to hack a company that makes really great virus scanners. And so that became a really cool concept because then I could see what methodologies they were using and I could apply my own code, which is what I did. Although I found that their stuff was actually not as great as I thought it was, so I ended up kind of improving on it anyway, which was, it's part of the hacker culture, right? You find something, you work on it, you be able to iterate on it. Long story short, that actually turned out to be a really fruitful relationship because that company has been a client of mine for some years now. Yeah, which is kind of fascinating. And
I know.
And this is the part about hacking that people sometimes there's a little bit of trepidation and confusion. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Dave wanted me to really sort of tie in some of what I do and why I'm here. Not just, and the why we're here doesn't necessarily mean your job title, right? And that's something I think is very important for humans, for us to remember and understand. But why am I here, right? And so one of the big things that my team and I, and of course when I'm saying I, it's obviously not just me. There are tons of people with me, beside me, in front of me, behind me. I mean, we have a massive group, a massive team with very talented folks. But what we're doing is we're designing a new network for ASU. And one of the things that I thought was incredibly brilliant, so when I went to the National Security Agency years ago, it was another part of my past. I used to be in intelligence a long time ago. It's not about designing networks that just work. It's also about designing networks that are survivable, sustainable. They can thrive, they can flourish, they can scale, depending on how we, as the users, need to use it, right? Based on our business needs, based on our personal needs, right? And so ASU said, we want a hacker to design, build, and run our network because we want to make sure that we're protected, that we're able to scale, that we're able to be global, that we're able to be elastic, and that we're able to incorporate emerging and disruptive technologies to the best of our abilities. That's what we're looking for. And that's actually really, really telling about ASU and a lot of the new leadership here at ASU. So we'll start off with that. And so what I'm going to talk about a little bit here is applying the hacker's mindset to the development and design of this new network. And there's a couple other components as well. For the sake of time and for the sake of also us kind of doing a first-time introduction, I'm not going to dive too deeply into the hacker's mindset because I'm hoping that I might be able to come back and do another talk on that. But I want you to ask as many questions as you possibly have. So we're going to go through the sides relatively quickly. So why are we here? Well, we're here to have an interactive discussion, specifically about how we're using the hacker's mindset to design and build the innovation network of ASU's future. That's essentially what we're doing here. That's what we're talking about. Every single day that I've been here, I'm in at least 3 to 4 hours worth of discussions on just this alone. And there's other stuff too, right? But for half your day to be dedicated to that, this is very fascinating. Now, why the hacker's mindset, you may be thinking? You may be thinking, well, what's so special about hackers? Why in the world do we care? Well, first and foremost, hackers are considered to be one of the largest and most significant sources of innovation in its time. And you may say, okay, well, what do you mean by hacker, Timothy? Because you're saying hacker, I'm thinking about, first and foremost, quick show of hands, how many of you feel pretty confident you know what a hacker is? Okay, cool. How many of you can tell me, who can tell me a leading company that is run by a hacker? Can anyone think of one? Okay, I'll make it easier. Can anyone tell me one company that actually in their ethos, in their documentation, they follow the hacker way? Can anyone tell me that one company? There's one company. Just take a wild guess. You could probably throw a rock and hit it. Facebook. Who said that? Facebook.
We're married. We do a lot of things together.
There you go. I'm learning. There's already. So Facebook's headquarters are actually at one hacker way. In fact, when Facebook went public, Mark Zuckerberg sent a letter to the shareholders saying, we're going to take a very different approach here at Facebook. We're going to follow the hacker way. This is what that means. In fact, most of the super successful companies today, when we talk about tech, most of them are run by hackers or guys and gals who consider themselves to be hackers. It's really fascinating. You don't really hear the conversation out in the public because the term hacker has a sort of negative connotation. But I've spent the bulk of my career as an ethical hacker protecting the United States. I mean, just 2 years ago, I was on my way to Belgium to do a talk, and my students were concerned I was going to get my head chopped off. I mean, it's really an interesting place to be when you're leveraging knowledge that you have about technology and you're able to apply it to these real world, very massive and sometimes wicked problems, right? So here's some of the things that people are saying about hackers. Svetlana, she actually is the one who really started this body of research around the social phenomena of hackers. The very fascinating thing about hackers is that society really doesn't know what to make of hackers. In fact, if you look up the definition for hacker, you get two contradictory definitions. You get one that says that you're somebody who doesn't know anything about anything because you hack stuff together. And then you get another that says, well, it's a person who, breaks into computer systems illegally. So you're either someone who knows nothing about nothing or you're someone who's a criminal. So then it paints a very clear picture of what society believes hackers are. But listen to some of the things that these other folks say. Janet Horowitz-Murray said, the spirit of the hacker is one of the greatest wellsprings of our time. Paul Graham, very interesting guy. We were just talking about Y Combinator. Paul Graham's a Y Combinator co-founder. And he talks about hacking in the sense of, it's called a hack when you do something in an ugly way. But when you do something so clever that you somehow beat the system, that's also called a hack. Ugly and imaginative solutions have something in common. They both break the rules. Right? For hackers, computers are just a medium of expression, similar to concrete for architects or paint for painters. So we're going to make a slight shift if you think about it in terms of how they're talking about hacking. Mark Zuckerberg, the word hacker has an unfairly negative connotation from being portrayed in the media as people who break into computers. In reality, hacking just means building something quickly or testing the boundaries of what can be done. Like most things, it can be used for good or bad, but the vast majority of hackers I met tend to be idealistic people who want to have a positive impact on the world. Hackers believe that something can always be better and that nothing is ever complete. They just have to go fix it. And often in the face of people telling them that it's impossible and challenging the status quo. And this is actually one of probably the most profound things I've heard Zuck say in a very long time. And I don't say that to be snarky. I guess I'm being a little cheeky, but there's a lot of conversations he's been having recently. Another thing that's really important here is that as our society is becoming more and more interconnected and more complex, and as I think that we're actually starting to become a little bit more human and understanding a little bit more of the humane side of being in a hyper-technology driven world, we're starting to really understand what that intersection, schools like yours, are a perfect example of that. At the University of Maryland, I was in something that we called the iSchool. And iSchools sit at the intersection of technology, society, and data. And so if you think about it, we're starting to see this convergence. It used to be that things were in these disparate stovepipes, but we're not seeing that anymore. We're now starting to see teams of not just engineers or just architects. We're now starting to see cross-functional teams in ways that are even more based on agile methodology, even more interactive, more iterative, virtual, right? I mean, we at ASU now, we have rolled out Zoom quite abundantly, where you can set up a meeting with almost anyone virtually, no matter where you are in the world, right? So let's talk a little bit about this innovation network of the future and what we mean by this, because you're going to hear about this a little bit in the coming years, and we call it the next generation network. And so the way I want you to think about the next generation network is that it is an iteration on what we have today. So we're taking into account the way the network works today, the infrastructure we have today, and ASU's growth, along with the mission and vision that ASU has, along with the fact that we hope that our students will always be members of the ASU community, just like any institution does, right? We want to make all of those experiences as seamless as possible. So the way to think about the Next Gen Network is that, and actually the way to think about the innovation network, if you will, is to think about it as a stack. And at the very base layer here is what we call the NGN, the Next Gen Network. And I use the term fabric because it makes a lot of sense to me. But there's a lot of folks who aren't really sure what we mean by fabric, so I'll refrain from saying that, and for now just say infrastructure. The idea of the next generation network. So I remember the first time we had a conversation about the next gen network, someone said, well, wait, we need to create a network that's going to make generational change. And I said, what does that mean? And they said, well, you know, generational change, like the generations that follow, like this network is going to be something great for them. And then I said, well, how often has the previous generation made something next generation that the following generation felt was next generation? That like never happens, right? Like when was the last time like your grandparents like built something for like Gen Zers or millennials and they were like, yeah, this is so next gen? That rarely happens, right? So my proposal was, let's take a different approach to this. Maybe we're thinking about this a little bit wonky, right? Maybe we should be co-creating this with the users. Maybe we should be talking with the users about what their experience is on the network now and what kinds of things they might look forward to in the future. Let's take a data-driven approach to it. Let's take a human-driven approach to it. And it was like, oh, wow. Okay, well, how do we do that? I said, well, let's start by making some surveys. Let's do some meet and greets. You know, I'm new here and talking about this new stuff. Let's go meet with all these different business units and ask them what they think. So that was my way of letting you know that you'll probably be receiving a survey later. So the next gen network piece is about limitless ability. Now, how are we planning to do that? We're actually, I don't look at ASU as really competing so much with other institutions of higher ed, as much as I think of us being in the same ballpark as like Netflix, Google, Amazon, and that kind of space. But I feel like we have, because we're an institution of higher ed and learning, and I'm a professor, this is really important to me. I feel like we're in a unique spot to have the right kinds of conversations, especially as it relates to some of the emerging and disruptive technologies that are out there, especially as it comes to the community around us. Universities are supposed to engage with the community around them. That's part of our ethos and our mission, right? Well, the next generation network is about infrastructure as code. What does that mean? Today, if a business unit, let's just say if your school said, hey, we want to spin up an entirely new network that we want to do some research stuff on, and we want it to be segmented this way, we want to have these kinds of securities and all of that. It's going to take you longer than a day, it's going to take you longer than a week, it might even take you longer than a month. In fact, it might take you somewhere in the ballpark of 6 to 10 months, if not longer, at current. And it's not even just because of technology, it's a lot of different things. ASU is just so massive that, you know, there are processes and procedures and then there aren't, right? So with infrastructure as code, what we're actually looking to do is do software-defined networking. Where that means is if a college comes to us and says, hey, if a school comes to us and says, hey, we want a new network, a new slice of the network, we can actually spin it up in moments as opposed to months, weeks, years. That's because the template of the networks is just simple scripting. So we can actually write scripts, put them into our workflow engine, let the workflow engine churn up that network. You got a new network deployed in minutes. That's what software-defined networking provides. You might say, wow, that sounds really interesting. Has anyone actually done that? Yeah, actually, Google's entire network is what they call a zero-touch network, which means that you don't even have to touch those blinking boxes anymore. Software-defined networking takes the importance of the network out of the control of the box and just makes it where the box is just moving data back and forth. It's agnostic. No one cares. Now, why would we do that? Well, think about what I said about deploying a new network for a new school or for an existing school. It also means we can do that for new offices anywhere in the world. It also means that if we want to build a new campus somewhere, we can stand up a network like that. These are the kinds of benefits that we're looking to bring to the network. One thing that's not listed on here, because it's a little bit more down in the weeds, but it's really exciting, ASU is acquiring its own dark fiber. I don't know if you know like how massive that means, like what that means, but it basically means we'll have like unlimited bandwidth, basically, in terms of connectivity. So we're getting our own dark fiber, which is the fiber optic lines under the ground, similar to like a Google. Google has their own dark fiber, right? ASU is going to own its own dark fiber. I believe we might be one of the only institutions in higher ed, if not one of the first, to have its own dark fiber. This is massive.
And is that like internal to Tempe across all ASU?
It's across the entire region.
Across the entire region.
Yeah, it's a dark fiber ring. It literally will go from the East Valley all the way to the West Valley and all the way back. Yeah, massive. One of the things that we've been asked to do is we need to provide all of this connectivity and capability to underserved communities as well, such as Native communities that may not have the same kinds of connectivity, or other communities. It depends on where we are in the city, right? So the next generation network is the fabric it's that technical infrastructure. So think of it that way. But it's going to be all code-based, which is really awesome. On top of that, we've been asked to evolve the identity and access management here at ASU. So identity and access management really isn't very sexy to a lot of people, but just to give you an idea, we've got 10.2 million identities here at ASU. 10.2 million, and growing all the time. Well, if you've got a new network with all these really cool, interesting capabilities like bandwidth, fast throughput, all that kind of stuff, easy deployability, rapid configuration, all that stuff, right? Well, in order for people to utilize things on that network, you kind of need to make sure that you have it connected to identities well, right? Because if someone's utilizing resources on the ASU network, you need to know that it was John Smith or Jane Smith. Right? That's important to know. If someone went to school and did a class, you need to know who's getting the credit for that course, right? These are all parts of identity. These things are all very important. Well, at ASU right now, we mostly do everything using our ASU Write, right? Show of hands, how many of you have an ASU Write? Exactly. But did you know that you don't actually have to attend ASU to have an ASU Write? Did you know that like pretty much anyone can get an ASU Write? That's pretty fascinating if you think about it, because it means that ASU not only it has identities for students, faculty, staff, we also have identities for people who are indirectly connected or loosely connected to ASU. Maybe they're folks who go to games, right? Maybe they're a friend of an alum. Maybe they're just a contributor. Maybe they're just someone who wants to come back to school, right? It could be anything. It could be anyone. There's a running joke when I first came to ASU. Someone said, well, at ASU, we consider customers to be from cradle to gray. I don't know if anyone else has ever heard that, but it was actually quite funny when I first heard it. Now, on top of that is next generation services. So you're probably thinking, okay, what is next generation services? What does that mean? And what exactly were we talking about? Well, have you ever heard of extended reality or virtual reality or augmented reality? A few months ago, so here's my dream. My dream is that in the classroom, you guys will be able to you'll be able to hollow port into class. So like my good friend Adi here is from New Zealand. If Adi's in New Zealand, he can hollow port into class here at ASU, right? And engage with people. And if he's physically there in class and he's in bio, he can alter the double helix right there in front of him, as other students are doing. So we invited a company on campus, and I said to them, hey, look, I want us to make like a complete like digital version of ASU. Like I want students to be able to London, they hollow port in, and you might say, what's hollow porting? Basically, you're wearing a set of glasses that takes an image of your body and puts you in digitally, in your sort of avatar, if you will, and people can see you as like you're really sitting there. So Magic Leap does that. Oculus, if you've ever seen some of that technology, which Facebook owns. And so we had Magic Leap come and do a demo. And so I got to tell you the story because it blew my mind. So we're in a conference room at UTO in the USB building. And Chris Matthews, a good friend of mine, fellow blockchain guy, he works at Magic Leap now. He came in with some units, we put them on our heads. And I said, well, what am I supposed to do now, Chris? He said, just look at the wall. And I said, okay. Well, I'm looking at the wall, there's nothing there. He said, just keep looking. So maybe about 2 seconds go by, and the wall started to freeze. And then the ice extended down the wall to the floor. But it didn't extend in like a way like, you remember like old games, like it might not have known to render the dimensions, right? No, this was perfect. It like got down to the floor, it recognized the floor, and the ice grew out toward me. I was standing there. The ice continued to grow between my legs. And I like literally looked and I saw it. And I heard a noise, so I looked back and I see something chipping through the ice. How many of you have seen Game of Thrones? How many of you watch Game of Thrones? Okay, so don't be mad at me. I kind of don't care if you are, but I still haven't seen it. I still haven't seen it yet. We started and we were like, yeah, this is a big commitment. We got to go back to it later. So literally what comes out of the wall is something called a White Walker. Has anyone ever seen one of these things? So the thing's coming, it climbs out of the wall and comes after me. And I said, well, what am I supposed to do? He said, you're supposed to swing your spear at it. So literally there are photos of me in our conference room swinging at this thing that's not there, okay? And I finally take the thing out, and but this is where it got really crazy. I said, okay, Chris, the thing's gone now. He said, yeah, but I want you to do one more thing. I said, okay, what? He said, you see the hole in the wall? I said, yeah. He said, I want you to go and look in it. And I was like, but there's nothing on the other side. It's pipes. And he said, no, just go up. So I walk up to the thing. Guys, no joke, I get up to the wall and I'm looking in. There's a whole completely different universe on the other side of the wall. So this is the kind of stuff that extended reality brings into an environment. So I wanted to bring that to ASU. I still want to bring that to ASU. Those are examples of next generation services. The kinds of things that researchers may be able to do in their labs, the kinds of things that professors and students may be able to do in their classrooms, the kinds of things that PD may need to do for safety. Those are the kinds of things that we're talking about when we say next generation services. So this is the stack. I am pretty much engaged on each of these things every single day. There are well over thousands of people at ASU engaging in this stuff every single day. So the big benefits of this next generation network. Well, one, we really want to catalyze science innovation. This is going to be a breeze round, right? Attracting world-class research. You can't attract world-class research if you don't have world-class facilities, right? And we know we have world-class talent, we know we've got world-class access, and we know we have the world-class reputation. And we know that we've got the chops in the portfolio, but we know we want to do more. And in order for us to do more, we've got to attract that top-tier research talent, especially since we've been trying to beat out the Stanfords and Harvards and MITs, right? Carnegie Mellon graduate here. Thinking globally and acting locally, right? This is another thing. Someone said to me, well, Tempe is the mothership for ASU. And I said, why? Why does Tempe need to be network-wise? Why does Tempe need to be the core that every network switch runs through if we're talking about being global? So how does that work? So what we came to is we said, well, actually, network-wise, logically, Tempe is just another campus that should operate just like any others. There's nothing special about the network here. And so this is actually putting us in a really unique place, because anytime we decide we want to stand up a new ASU X, wherever that is, it's literally just about my team and I sending a stack of equipment to that office, those guys plugging it in, running the executables, phoning home the way that we've already defined in our software-defined network. The infrastructure is code. The system interacts with the network the way that we define it. That's way better than we have today. We just don't have that kind of scale and flexibility today. Create smart and positive outcomes at scale. This is really, whenever you see or hear me talking about smart and positive outcomes, I'm talking about human outcomes. Because we tend to focus a little too much on the technology. If there's one thing I will say about the tech community, sometimes we just really romanticize a little too much about the technology itself and not about the impact and outcomes. Because that's really where the magic happens, right? We talk about smart cities and IoT and all of that. We're gonna talk a little bit more really briefly. that stuff at the end of the day, it doesn't mean anything if it doesn't make our lives better in some way, shape, or form, right? Extending ASU's reach to underserved communities. We know that ASU does work in underserved communities now. We want to do more. We want to expand that reach. We want to be talking about ASU in Europe and Asia, right? We already know Dr. Crow's been in China. There's all types of stuff going on with ASU all over the world. So what about underserved communities here? Like in the immediate community? What about in the region, right? What about in the country? ASU is in a unique spot to forage and really pioneer some of that trail. So we're reimagining a new way of working for everyone in the ASU community. Specifically, ASU learners will experience instruction and learning in new ways that extend beyond boundaries. I already said that, right? We're building a roadmap to achieve limitless goals. I have a really big graphic here, and it must not have come through. Literally, when I put the slide deck in the email, it said it was like 10 megs. I was like, man, it's that one picture. It's got to be.
You're going to pass up the goggle. Check it out.
Oh, dude, you know what?
That would have been cool with the ice coming down.
That would be really cool. But you know what? I didn't know if, one, I wasn't sure about time. I wasn't sure about my new...
The goggles will create the time.
Yeah. So I got a video though. If we have time, actually, it'll be cool to show you. Limitless goals. I won't go into all of this, but one thing I would like to point out is, so Dave mentioned my PhD. My area of research is in, I study how hackers think. That's what I wrote my body of work on. But I did that within a business school, within organizational management and behavior. And so the understanding of how the hacker mind is used for innovative design to improve organizations or change them or disrupt them is essentially what we're talking about here. So intentional design and design thinking are elements that I think this audience would appreciate, but I thought it would be remiss not to mention that we're taking a very mindful approach to how we design the network. And of course, right, we want to be able to collaborate across universities unencumbered. I would like for you guys, someone to go visit a university in New York City and your identity just pick up just like that. There's nothing you need to do. Why do you need to go to an office to get a guest account and all of that when you can just use your ASU account? And this university in New York is one of our partners. Why not? We're looking at bringing self-sovereign identity here, which I'll talk a little bit about under the emerging and disruptive technologies, because there's a number of emerging technologies that we're bringing into the fold at ASU that don't exist here now, such as artificial intelligence. So there's a lot of different ways and conversations about artificial intelligence, and I just wanted to show you this slide just to give you an understanding of how disparate the understandings and perspectives of AI are, okay? So there's no unified perspective of AI. If you remember Stephen Hawking, brilliant guy, right? He's like, AI is something I'm afraid of, okay? And Stephen Hawking was not afraid of black holes, but he's afraid of AI. Then you jump down to, I don't know, let's just say Peter Thiel. So Peter Thiel, one of the co-founders of PayPal. Peter's like, hey, look, I think either way, whether it's good or bad, it's gonna be a win. So Zuck, he's like, what are you worried about AI for? You can talk to my AI butler about your concerns. So you have a really interesting place. Now, there is one person on here, this guy, who I'd like to point out specifically, because these two gentlemen really sort of are running the conversation about AI in terms of the tech companies in that sphere. But they're on completely polar opposites in terms of their thoughts. Mark is like, hey, let's jump all in. And Elon's like, well, I think there needs to be some regulation around AI. Well, I mean, to be quite frank, we know that this is like so new and so revolutionary that there's a lot of things we need to be thinking about, especially in terms of how we as human beings interact with the AI, and also what in the world AI means. But guys, let me just completely settle your fears here a little bit. There was a really brilliant computer scientist that I met about a year ago, and she told me, it may sound very trite, and I know this is on recording, but I stand by her quote. And she said to me, AI is like sex in high school. Everyone says they're doing it, because they think everyone else is doing it, but no one really knows what they're doing. And I thought that was so interesting. The other thing that I heard from another scientist I thought was really fascinating is that he said, if it's AI, if they're talking about AI, it's probably PowerPoint. If it's machine learning, it's Python. So right now, they're really, in terms of true AI, we're really not there for the sake of what you've seen in the movies and all that. But we do machine learning pretty well. And machine learning is basically just taking historical data, running various kinds of mathematical analytics on it, and then forecasting what might happen based on those analytics. That's really what machine learning is all about. So we're looking right now from a identity perspective, actually IoT. I'll go into IoT because there's an AI IoT project we're working on right now. So IoT, Dave mentioned the Alexas. How many of you have an Amazon Echo in your house?
Still in the box.
Okay, cool. How many of you have it in your bedroom? Okay, I advise against that. Nothing may happen. But well, the thing about it is it captures random sounds for quality assurance, of course. Quality assurance purposes. So we have one in our kitchen, and there's little things I've gotten it to do now, and she's kind of gotten used to it. She comes in the kitchen, making coffee, and she says, "Alexa, tell me what's on, my news," because she's got her news, I've got my news, and so that kind of stuff, really exciting, right? But we're doing so much more than that here. Alexa is like just a scratch on the surface. How many of you have seen those blue emergency lights that are on university campuses, right? So we've taken a couple of those, stripped them out, and completely retrofitted them with 20 IoT sensors just to see what we get. See what kind of data we get. What does it tell us? What do we see? We've got the two of them in Research Park right now. We've got, I want to say somewhere in the ballpark of maybe 700 plus of those things just in terms of the ASU's purview. And the idea here being to leverage those emergency blue light poles, so you can, of course, still using them for emergencies, but in a more interconnected fashion, in the sense that now we can get, foot traffic data, what days are people more, or is there more foot traffic to the MU versus, this other place, or, when there was an emergency, what's the preferred method of communication? We can use LoRa technology to see traffic patterns. We can, all of these different things, right? And so right now we've got this pilot where we've taken these two poles and we've deployed them. So I wanted to show you a little bit about IoT because I'm sure you all are very familiar in some way, shape, or form. In fact, most of us probably have 3 or 4 devices on us right now. How many of you have a smartwatch? Right? There we go. So look at it like this. We're talking about by 2020, oh yeah, that's now, I know. 40 to 50 billion devices, right? That's wild. So then, but the thing I really wanted to point out here on this particular slide is the risks. Privacy, cybersecurity, liability. Those are the things that whenever you're hearing us talk about IoT in terms of our network, we're focused on how do we do privacy by design, how do we provide the protections, how do we build that into the system. And so that's one of the reasons why you saw that stack, because we want to make sure that there's the appropriate security and privacy levels at each level. Smart cities. So we have an initiative here at ASU called the Smart CCR, Smart Campus Cities Region. That's the stack that I showed you has to apply to the whole thing. And so Smart City, one of the reasons I wanted to show you this is because, hey, with Novus coming, right? With all this talk about Smart Campus, what does that mean? The UTO has put out a really fascinating innovation book about unique services that might be available at ASU after we've built the next generation network. And I encourage all of you to see if you can get it from the UTO office. You can reach out to me and I'd be happy to see if I can get you a copy. Distributed ledger technology. You've heard of blockchain, probably. You've probably heard of Bitcoin, right? So blockchain and Bitcoin are not the same thing. Essentially, Bitcoin is the first application of blockchain, if you will. But the reason I wanted to show you this is because we're looking right now into, for example, from the identity side of things, to bring in what we call self-sovereign identity, which means you own the identity. It's provisioned for you here at ASU, but the things that you do in your life, they're attributes in your identity, but you control who gets to see what, when, and how. And we'll leverage, and I was actually having a conversation about this morning, and they said, well, if we're gonna use ML and AI, we've got to make sure that we're protecting people's privacy. And I said, well, why don't we use ML and AI for good then? And he said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, why don't we let the ML make recommendations to the user about how they're using the network that only they can see? I don't need their recommendations for how to use the network. Let's give them to them. Let's use the ML to help them better utilize the network. So in terms of self-sovereign identity, we're actually looking at using what's called a DAG, which is the only thing you really need to know about this is it's substantially faster than blockchain. That's it. So I wanted to open it up for questions and discussion and just make sure that you guys had an opportunity to ask any kinds of general thoughts and curiosities you might have about anything we talked about today. And feel free to, there's no good, bad questions. They're just questions and curiosities. So thank you so much for taking this opportunity to let me speak with you and share with you. Thank you. So are there any questions or thoughts? Please. And say your name if you don't mind.
My name is Max Gabriel.
And what do you do or study, Max?
Anthropology at Silicon Valley.
Cool.
Or that would start. But so along those lines, you mentioned, by the way, congratulations.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
Welcome. Earlier you mentioned passing a more humane direction. I assume somewhere in the back of your mind mentioned like Tristan Harris, or humane technology.
So, I'm sorry, so.
Tristan Harrison.
Yes.
Humane technology.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious, your stance in terms of what that means, because you mentioned that oftentimes hackers and technologists forget about the human impacts, but then sometimes when we talk about, for instance, what you were saying about AI, obviously we're nowhere near true AI, but we're already at a point where the research in that direction is having some fairly dystopian outcomes.
Sure.
So what does humane technology mean to you?
Yeah. So that's a really great question. Actually, we should write a paper about that together. So from my perspective, so one of the first places to start is in, we had a reading club at the UTO. Our CIO, Dr. Lev Gonik, said, hey, here's a book about AI. Let's read it as a leadership team and let's come and discuss it. One of the first things that you notice is that when people are talking about AI, you'll hear things like, well, how do we make sure that the AI is doing the right things? How do we make sure that the AI, we know it's going to run faster than us, but how do we make sure that we're able to keep up? Or you'll hear things like, AI will do all of that for us. But what you don't hear is really the symbiotic relationship that would need to be there, right? Because you can't just, I do ML projects at home, deep learning, machine learning projects at home, right? So I have a cousin who's a K-pop producer. Anyone know K-pop, Korean pop? Yeah. Okay, cool. So she's a K-pop producer, and we got some research from these researchers at Stanford, and over a weekend, took the work that they'd done, script up something that will essentially tell us whether or not a song is gonna be a hit on the Billboard 100. Actually quite simple to do, actually wasn't hard at all. BigML.com, which is a cloud-based machine learning platform. You could use that, and in fact, it's free for students for a year. So we use that, came up with, hey, she makes a new song, we run the algorithm on it, and the algorithm will give us a 0 or 1. 1 means it'll be a hit, 0 means it won't be a hit. So that to me was really fascinating, right? Because that isn't something, it's relatively benign. It's something that could help a producer in their business, maybe. Maybe it could help in analyzing music and so on and so forth. But then when I was in Maryland, I spoke at a community event, and they were concerned about very, very different things. One person was a bus driver and said, hey, I'm really worried about my job. Is someone gonna replace me? Another person was a bartender. Hey, I mean, making drinks is nothing but measures. Is the robot gonna be able to do that better than me? So on and so forth. And when you talk about AI, it has there's a lot of confusion mixed up with it too, in terms of what it actually means. For me, when I talk about humane tech, I'm really talking about our approach to it. I'm really talking about what we were talking about earlier in terms of impact. I think anytime we're thinking about the design, architecture, building, buying, whatever it is of some technology, we need to understand in our minds what exactly is it that we're looking for. What is this human collective looking for from AI? Not what is the AI gonna tell us to look for, because that's what ends up happening. We start talking about AI and we say, oh my gosh, there's all this unstructured data, let's just throw AI at it and it'll tell us everything we need to know. That's not how that works. That's not how it works, right? We do still need to facilitate that interaction. And that facilitation is, in my mind, where that humane aspect lives, because it's gonna be about us sitting around and having a debate in terms of what we envision the AI to be. Because to be quite frank, AI doesn't have a face, right? There is no one AI. AI is whatever you design yours to be, whatever you design yours to be, whatever I design mine to be. So there is no uniform way of thinking about it, right? And so that's how I think about it. So in terms of the network and the humane approach we're taking there, most institutions, when they build a network for their users, they don't talk with their users about what they need. They just say, because they figure it's the same answer. When we first did our surveys, you know what people said they wanted out of the network? More gigabytes. That's it. That was like the biggest thing. I just need more GBs. Give me more GBs, I'll be good. Well, that's not really the answer. It's not more GBs. It's actually that you need infrastructure to enable those services, because the GBs, once you have a dark fiber, the dark fiber ring, the GBs are there and limitless, right? So that's the humane side of it to me, is that co-creation and intentional aspect of it.
I think I'm going to play off that question a little bit. It feels to me like ASU has a huge opportunity at a large scale to transform how growth occurs. And it would be less about you have a plan of study that we kind of get you through, and it would be more about where are the opportunities that are exciting you in the growth and what's happening in your community, and then how are we using the feed to level you up one moment at a time, and you're kind of hacking your way into your degree over time based on momentary value creation. And for me, what that would mean is ASU would have some service that's somehow smart feeding me information that's related not just to the channel, what ASU thinks I need to know, but to where for what you've done now, this might be interesting next. And here's what your peers are. And I'm wondering, what are we, like, there are so many different feeds in the life, and I just watch students sit here like this, they're constantly, their thumbs are hurting, whatever. And the more we can help students understand what data I allow into that metric, and then why it's serving me back this, ASU could be pioneering that. So students become really intelligent consumers of why feeds are giving them certain things. What does it mean to allow my data? What's the benefit to me? And then all that stuff. And then manufacture in a way that's supporting growth, not just social connection. You are spot on. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, how do you structure what they're already doing into a piece of
so there's data coming.
So this is actually, you're hitting at a pivotal debate I'm having at the UTO right now. And it is around some tools we use for data analysis. Well, the tools we use right now requires us to prune the data before we put it in. So basically, I have to select what data I want to put in, run the analytics on that particular data, and then see what comes out. I believe that's flawed. I prefer the CERN model, if anyone is familiar with CERN. CERN says, okay, let's just put all the data we have in, run the analytics, and see what comes out. And then when we get our actionable information on the other side, or whatever the research that we got out of that, the findings, then now we know which things we can prune out that we don't need, because we can look at what gave us the outcomes that we found, right? I'm trying to bring that model here. And it's not that folks don't understand the difference. It's actually more so that, it's kind of like, well, we've been entrenched with this one thing for a while, and now you're wanting us to go do this other thing now, and it's kind of a big lift. The reason I bring this up is because one of the core elements of what we're trying to do is an intelligence and operations platform. And it essentially is a data analytics stack. That's basically what it is. And I'm specifically looking at this kind because it has ML already built in, really good ML in fact, and it also is incredibly user-friendly. So any person can throw their data into the platform and slice and dice it in a graphical user interface, the way most of us are comfortable, right? And so that's a really important thing that you touched on, because my thought is that if we can figure out how to leverage across the enterprise something like that, it doesn't have to be for operations. I mean, operations just means stuff we're doing, and intelligence just means tell me something I didn't know. I mean, if you really think about it, right? And then actionable intelligence is you told me something that I didn't know that I can actually do something about now. That's one of the biggest problems with data right now. It's 10, 20 years ago, we said, oh, we're not aggregating enough data. We need to aggregate more data. Now everybody's aggregating tons of data, right? But what are they doing with the data? And most of the data ends up going stale. I prefer to actually have people or students, researchers, whoever it is, actually on these platforms that we're building, that we're iterating. Remember the hacker way, right? So we're gonna build an MVP of this thing, a minimum viable product of it. I want to have students and faculty and whoever else hacking away at this thing so that we can learn. The next generation network. So someone said, hey, well, we got to figure out how do we test it in production, but without it being in production where it's going to mess stuff up if it breaks. And I said, well, don't we have a ton of students that do hackathons all the time? How come we can't just set up a stack for them and let them hack away at it and let us learn from what they exploited? Seems pretty easy to me. Yeah, but I don't know. No, I think that sounds brilliant. Why not? I mean, why can't we have our own bug bounty for the network? So one last question, and then I think Dave's going to kick us out.
Thank you. This is awesome.
Thank you.
Michael Bernstein, I'm a research professor at the school. I work on an idea of social value creation.
Ooh.
So I have two questions. One, does the dark fiber mean I can cancel my Cox system? Two, so I'm wondering if you can help me reflect on or correct my thinking or share the way, from a hacker perspective, you think about this. But a lot of the ideas that you're sharing, self-sovereign identity, not interfering with data processing, providing a service like this, stacks that you can just send out, are dangerous to certain business models that exist in our society. And that ASU would produce them and potentially be able to have them be actionable in other ways. It seems like it would attract unwanted attention in some ways. It's dangerous to me, but I don't know if I'm thinking about it the right way. If there's another way to think about it.
Let's pull on the thread. Help us understand the danger that you're seeing, because it may be different than the rest of us.
Well, I mean, right now, a lot of fortunes are made on owning data.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And a lot of fortunes are made on the monopolies to access fiber.
Yes.
Infrastructure.
Yes.
And a lot of monopolies are made on being able to control the ability to stand up a network.
Yes. Okay. I can answer this pretty. So the first part is ASU as an institution, we're not allowed to be a service provider. So we can't compete with like Cox or, so that by law, we just, that's not, what we can do as a university is we can provide extended access to our resources in a way of enriching the community. I mean, and that's what universities have always done, right? My first library I ever went to was a university library. Now, on the other part about the dangers, you're absolutely right about data. And that's one of the reasons why I started by saying I think that we're in a really unique place as an institution of higher learning, because in terms of like capturing that data, selling it, monetizing it, we're not interested in doing that. Right? And so that's why we can do something like a self-sovereign identity and say that the ownership of that is owned by the person, right? The other piece of that is that collaboration and cross-pollination are built into our DNA as a university. And then lastly, what I would say about that is, in terms of identity, like you bring up self-sovereign, and here's something I'll leave you with. Right now, all of the major industries are in a mad dash to own your identity. Right now, all the banks are trying to figure out how they can create their own identity solutions. We all have already seen that Facebook tried to come out with their Libra platform. Everyone's trying to figure it out because identity, it turns out, is actually one of the most valuable things on the internet. That data, do you remember when people said data was the new oil? No, it's not data's the new oil. We're the new oil. So that's something that's really fascinating. And I think that as ASU, we're not interested in utilizing people like their fuel. We're interested in providing our students come here to the university, they finish a degree, they finish courses, that stuff needs to be accurately represented there. So when they go for their jobs, right, these things can be validated and verified, right? That someone can actually go into a new institution, pick up a new job, go to school again, and still have that same identity that they got at ASU, and then come back to ASU to Tempe to a game, and things pick up right where they left off. That's what we're looking to provide. Hey, thank you so much for having me here. It was so great spending time with you guys. I really appreciate it. Thank you.